Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Paul's Sports Takes. The time has finally come to take a look at the 2024 outdoor track and field season. The indoor season is just about wrapping up. We've got World Indoors next weekend. A lot of the collegiate conference championships are going on as I'm filming this video, as a matter of fact. And so it is just about time to start looking towards the outdoor season. Obviously, 2024, this is an Olympic year. The Olympics will be in Paris at the end of July and early August. I'm just absurdly excited for those. This video is just going to be covering the men's events. And I'm going to do the women's events in a future video. If I tried doing men's and women's in one video, I think my head would explode while I was trying to edit that. So for this one, we're just going to be looking at the men's events. We're going to be doing all of the track and field events, not looking at any of the road running events or any relays. This video is not necessarily going to be the most in-depth look at all of these events, but it's just going to more be a general overview of the key players and the major storylines to keep an eye on as the season progresses. And even with trying to do this kind of toned down, less detailed version, I can almost guarantee this video is still going to be at least 45 minutes long. With all that being said, it is almost the best time of the year. It is almost outdoor track season. It is an Olympic year. Let's get into it. Okay, so we're going to be starting off in somewhat of an unexpected spot. I feel like most of the times with track videos that look at all of the events, there's just an inherent bias towards putting sprinting events at the start. We're switching that up. Like I've said before, I'm a thrower. I'm going to give throwers the respect they deserve. We're going to talk about the 4 throwing events first, starting off with the best event in the world, discus. This year is most likely going to be the same as the past 2 years have been, where it is going to be the 3 big dogs, Daniel Stahl, reigning world champion, reigning Olympic champion, duking it out with Christian Che, 2022 world champion, and Mikolas Alekna, the greatest young thrower the world has ever seen. And it's just going to be those 3 guys just duking it out for the podium once again. And it is going to be awesome to watch all year. Last year, obviously, we saw Christian Che, prior to Worlds, throw 71.86 to tie Daniel Stahl's PR, locking them together at joint 4th all time. But then at World Championships in Budapest, Daniel Stahl, with one of the most clutch performances in the history of sports, goes 71.46 in the final round of the World Championships to break Christian Che's championship record from 2022 and taking his 2nd world title. Every time that these 3 guys, including Alekna, get in the same competition, it is fireworks. And Alekna is still, honestly, kind of surprisingly to me, he's still not a full professional yet. He's doing another year at Cal right now, which good for him. I think part of that might be because he still is not an NCAA champion yet. He got silver in 2022, I believe. And then last year, I think he was 4th, I want to say, just off the podium. So that could be a motivating factor there. But once the collegiate season is done and they all get back on the pro circuit and we head towards Paris, it's going to be electric. But obviously, behind those 3 guys, there's another very strong pack of throwers. You have 2 other guys who threw 70 last year, and Lucas Weisheidinger and Alex Rose. And then you've got a couple other really strong throwers behind them. Maddie Denny, who, if I'm not mistaken, won the Prefontaine Classic last year. And then Andreas Goodzius, the bronze medalist from Eugene, is always a threat in major competitions. So don't get me wrong. It is an incredibly deep field, and there are so many really, really good throwers in the world, elite throwers in the world. But when it comes to the looking at actually getting on the podium in Paris, it's really hard to bet against the big 3 right now because they are just head and shoulders above everybody else. Moving into shot put, you guys know who the first person to talk about here is. It is Ryan Krauser, maybe the greatest athlete in the world right now. He opened up his indoor season last week at USATF Indoors and was 2 centimeters off breaking his own indoor world record of 2282. I would be astounded if that mark of 2282 is still standing after the World Indoors in Glasgow next week. So he is going to be his usual dominant, absurdly good, historically great, never before seen self. Joe Kovacs is going to be someone very interesting to watch this year because last year, for those of you that don't know, in the offseason before last season, him and his wife welcomed twins. And that is an incredibly hard thing to do, raising newborn twins while being the second greatest shot putter in the history of the world, pretty much. But he did it anyway. He got a bronze in Budapest last year, and then he closed out his season at Prefontaine throwing 22.93, which only 4 men have ever thrown farther than that, including himself. And that was all with him and his wife being very public about them having struggles with his sleep regimens and his training regimens. So now, moving into 2024, when him and his wife Ashley they've had their kids for a year now, they've had a season under their belt, they potentially have a better understanding of how to balance that kind of elite athlete training as well as being parents. So all I'm saying is that Joe Kovacs, he started his season out really slowly last year and still was well over 22 meters in Budapest, and then obviously just under 23 meters by the end of the season. If he can kind of move that peak up a couple weeks or so and get that to be in Paris this year, it's not a sure shot for Krauser to three-peat his Olympic title. Obviously, Tom Walsh is going to be in there as well. And then you've got the Italians, Zane Weir and Leonardo Fabri. Fabri obviously came out really big, surpassed basically everyone's expectations in Budapest last year and took the silver medal. He's already opened really well indoors this year. He's well over 22 meters already. Zane Weir, I believe, is just a hair under 22 right now. I think he might be at like 21, high 21.8, low 21.9. So he'll be a threat as the season moves along. Obviously, we've got Josh Awatunde and Peyton Otterdahl as well. And then Rajendra Campbell, who kind of came out of nowhere through 22 last year. He just, today, the day that I'm filming this video, he also went over 22 indoors to prove that throw last year wasn't really a fluke. So there are a ton of guys that are going to be in the mix for those last two spots or that last spot on the podium, because I really feel like when it comes to Paris time, it's going to be Krauser and Kovacs at the top once again. But the men's shot put is just so deep right now. Last year, we had 11 men go over 22 meters, and it is going to be very interesting to see how much we can approach that this year. We already have 4 in Ryan Krauser, Tom Walsh, Leonardo Fabri, and now Rajendra Campbell. And so I will be very anxious to see what the rest of the season will hold. As we move to the next event, which we're going to be talking about javelin now, this might be the one that I am the most excited to talk about because I have a very interesting idea for what this season could look like. We're going to start off with some of the regular players from the last 2 or 3 years. Obviously, kind of the top dog right now is Neeraj Chopra. Olympic champion in Tokyo, world champion last year in Budapest. He's still yet to break 90 meters, which is kind of astounding, but he just brings it every single meet, especially in the really big, really important meets. So he is going to be a tough one to beat when it comes to Paris, and he'll put up some really good marks throughout the season. Jakub Vadlich is the other guy who's medaled at each of the last 3 global championships in Tokyo, Eugene, and Budapest. It's kind of the same deal as Chopra. He just always seems to be one step behind him at the global championships. But he is so consistent throughout the year. And right now, there's no reason to assume that consistency has any signs of slowing down. Julian Weber from Germany is another really solid guy. He's gotten 4th at the last 3 global championships, which your heart just kind of breaks for him. But at the regular season meets, he is just so crazy consistent. Like basically every single Diamond League meet is some order of him, Chopra, and Vadlich in the top 3, and they kind of just switch spots around sometimes. Arshad Nadeem from Pakistan was the silver medalist last year in Budapest. Really kind of shocked a lot of people, I think, at least people who don't intently follow javelin. But he threw 87 something. He's broken 90 before, so he'll definitely be one to watch this year. And then 2022 world champion Anderson Peters is going to be a threat as always. But this is where it gets interesting, because I think there is someone that everyone is forgetting about. And that man's name is Johannes Vetter. This man, he was like absolutely going nuclear when I was first getting into track and field. And I remember I was so excited to watch the javelin throw at the Tokyo Olympics. The first time I'd really intently followed a global championship for track. And I was like, Johannes Vetter, this guy is the second farthest javelin thrower of all time. He threw 96 meters like a couple weeks before the Olympics. And I was so excited to see what he would do. And then he comes in ninth and doesn't even make the cut for top 8. He takes one throw in the finals, and it was like 82 something, and then he fouls his next two throws. And he is completely off. It was, my brain could not handle what I had seen, because I was like, there's no way. Like, this man is throwing 7 meters farther than anybody else in the world. How can this happen? And I'm still not entirely sure how that happened at Tokyo. I've heard some people say that he wasn't, or I've seen some things that he wasn't fully accustomed to the runway or something. There's always the potential of injuries, especially when it comes to throwers, and that's what you've seen a lot out of him in the last 2 years. I believe he's only thrown at 6 total meets across 2022 and 2023, and his best mark was 85 meters, which is still really good, but it is a far cry from where he usually is. And for those of you that don't know, a benchmark of where he usually is, like I said, he has the second farthest throw of all time at over 97 meters. He has 17 career meets over 90 meters. And that's not individual throws. This is at meets. So he could have had multiple 90-meter throws on the same meet. He's had 17 meets over 90 meters. The 5 guys that have made up the last 3 global podiums, Vyacheslav Vesely, Neeraj Chopra, Jakub Vadlich, Arshad Nadeem, and Anderson Peters, have 6 total combined 90-meter meets in their career. So he is about 3 times, on pure volume and distance-wise, he's about 3 times better than the last 3 global podiums combined. He has 7 throws in his career farther than any other active thrower in the world has ever thrown in their entire career. When he was doing his thing, he was doing it at a level we have only ever seen rivaled by Jan Zelezny. And I think, and I really, really hope that this is going to be the year that he finally comes back into form. With the Olympics coming up, where that was kind of, not to be too dramatic, but the site of his greatest defeat or whatever in Tokyo. Judging from what he's been posting on his Instagram, he's been working through some injuries last year, but he seems to be fully healthy now. He's been throwing really well, apparently, with a heavy javelin, so heavier than what they throw in competition, and on kind of a modified short approach. He said he's throwing just under 80 meters right now, so he seems to be back. And I really hope he is, because it's just, when he is throwing 7 meters farther than anybody else in the world, that is just such a sight to see. And every single track and field fan is being robbed by him not being at peak performance. So that is my biggest hope for the 2024 track and field season. And maybe you could call it a bold prediction. I think Johannes Vetter will be back with a vengeance. In the hammer throw, this is an event this year that feels really wide open when it comes to actually who's going to make the Olympic podium. Obviously, the reigning world champion is Ethan Katzberg. Really popped off in Budapest last year. I think he PR'd by 3 meters at the World Championships, which is absurd. And he's really young, so he's only going to be getting better and better theoretically. Wojciech Nowicki, who took the silver medal last year, he's obviously incredibly good. Benshei Halash, who took the bronze medal last year, is going to be a factor. And then you've got a couple Americans and Rudy Winkler, who had a really solid season last year, but did not perform well in Budapest. And then Daniel Ha, who he's thrown over 80 meters in his career, but the really intriguing thing about him is he just shattered the indoor world best, because World Athletics doesn't actually think it's an event, He shattered the world best in the weight throw indoors, which is like hammer, but the ball is heavier and the court is shorter. Obviously, weight throw and hammer throw isn't always a great one-to-one transition, because despite it being the same motion and the same general idea, obviously sometimes the best throwers in the weight are not the best throwers in the hammer. But I would say that is a positive sign for Haw moving into the outdoor season. And then obviously you still have 5-time world champion Pavel Fidek in the mix. He finished just off the podium in Budapest last year, but he was performing well below his standards coming into Budapest, and then he threw 80 meters. I'm pretty sure it was 80 meters on the dot at the World Championships. So he still definitely has it in him, and he's obviously a phenomenal championship performer, winning 5 world titles in a row from 2013 to 2022. So it is impossible to count him out when it comes to those kind of world championships in the Olympics. Now that throwing is out of the way, now we can circle back and we'll talk about the sprints. When it comes to the 100 this year, there are maybe a couple of favorites that stand above the pack, namely Noah Lyles, who, is the reigning world champion and also is smashing his 60-meter personal best indoors this year. But the pack that they're standing out from is easily like 15 to 20 men deep. Like I mentioned a second ago, reigning world champion Noah Lyles is going to be absolutely hell-bent on getting the Olympic triple, and it is entirely in his wheelhouse because he won the world title in the 100 last year after running, I think it was 6:51 indoors in the 60, and then he ran 9:83 outdoors. This year, he's running 6:43 in the 60, and so it is terrifying to think about how fast he's going to run outdoors now that his start is better. Um, yeah, it's going to be very hard to bet against Lyles, but that also brings up some interesting questions of who's going to make the U.S. team, because the U.S. has so many guys. You have Noah Lyles, Christian Coleman, Fred Kerley, reigning U.S. champion Crevant Charleston is in the mix. It seems there's always one or two collegiate guys from the U.S. that run really well and give the big guys a scare at the national championships. So there's a ton of availability and not a ton of spots to make it to the Olympics for the U.S. And then some of the non-U.S. guys, obviously you've got the rest of the podium from last year in Budapest in Zarnell Hughes and Letsile Tebogo. Tebogo just recently broke the outdoor 300-meter world record by a pretty significant margin. So he is poised to do crazy things in the 100 and the 200 this year. And then you've also got the pair of young Jamaicans in Akeem Blake and Oblique Seville. Blake he ran really well last year. He ran 9:89 outdoors in the 100. And then he's been tearing it up in the 60 this year. So he's poised for a great season. And then Oblique Seville really kind of came on super, super strong at Worlds. And honestly, he was kind of my favorite moving into the final because he just tore up the heats and the semifinals in Budapest. And he really looked poised to do something big, and he ended up just off the podium in Budapest. So they're definitely going to be two athletes to watch. But like I said, it's just so deep that it is like impossible to name everyone that could end up on the podium. There were 12 guys last year between 9:83 and 9:89, which is a statement of just the crazy depth of the event right now. But then also, maybe we'll see this more this year as Noah Lyles, like I said, seems to improve his start a lot, so maybe that could give him an edge. But it was a lot of guys that were running really fast, but not a lot of guys that were pulling away from the pack. And you saw 3 guys run tied for the world lead last year. So there's just so many ways that this cookie could crumble, and we will just have to wait and see what happens. But regardless of what happens, I can guarantee you it will definitely be worth watching. In the 200 this year, the absolute biggest storyline all year will be, can Noah Lyles finally come through and get that Olympic gold? If you don't remember, in Tokyo 3 years ago, he had to settle for a bronze medal in 1974. And I have this strange feeling that doesn't sit very well with him. He is undefeated in the 200 since that race. And in that time, he's just obliterated the record books, taken the title from Bolt for most sub-20 clockings ever. Obviously taking the American record from Michael Johnson and Eugene in 1931. Yeah, he's just insane. His 60-meter progression this year is pointing towards very promising things, and not just the 100, but also the 200. But I think another interesting thing that could push him to that next level of greatness, maybe see him approach the 19.2s, 19.1s, is going to be one man by the name of Letsile Tebogo that I already mentioned, ran the 300-meter world record just a couple days ago. Tebogo came, I'm pretty sure, the closest anyone's come to beating Noah Lyles in a 200 in one of the Diamond League meets last year, where Lyles ran 1947 and Tebogo ran 1950. And he is just getting better and better and better. So that's definitely going to keep Noah on his toes as the season moves along. Obviously, you can't count out Arian Knighton either. Last season for Knighton, obviously, we didn't see the same level of excellence necessarily that we saw from his 1949 back in 2022, but it was a much more consistent, kind of a seemingly professional season where he peaked at the right time and was able to get that Olympic or that world championship silver. Those three really feel like a pretty solidified podium even before the season starts, just because of how far head and shoulders above the competition they seem to be. But you obviously can't count out Zarnell Hughes as well. And then really nobody performs better compared to what they have done in the season to that point, better than Kenny Bednarik. So if he makes the U.S. team, he's always a threat to make it onto the podium. If Fred Kerley can make it onto the U.S. team, he obviously didn't make it onto the team for Budapest last year. So it'll be very interesting to see if he can make it onto the Olympic team in the 200. And then Andre DeGrasse, the reigning Olympic champion from 2021, he had a really poor season last year by his standards. I think some of it was injury, but a lot of it was just not running great. But he really started to come on at the end of the year, and he ended up winning the Prefontaine Classic last year in 1976. So it'll be interesting to see as this season moves along if that was kind of a fluke one-off performance and DeGrasse really is starting to show some age, or if that was a sign of he just had a bad season, but he can still run with the big dogs at the highest level. One kind of under the radar athlete when it comes to the professional scene that I think could make a really big impact this year is Udodi Onwuzurike. He's a Nigerian runner. He was at Stanford last year, where he was the NCAA champion in the 200. And in the semifinals at the NCAA championships, he ran 1976. And that time tied him with Andre DeGrasse for the fifth fastest athlete in the world last year. He has gone professional since then. He did not run at Worlds last year, but you expect with a professional season, obviously a big thing with collegiate athletes is that they always run a ton of races, usually far more than professional athletes run. So with a little bit less wear and tear on his legs throughout the season, I think Onwuzurike could be kind of a sleeper pick as we move closer and closer to the Olympics. When you're looking at the 400 this year, there are going to be a ton of guys in the mix. But I feel like when these two guys are completely healthy, Stephen Gardner of the Bahamas and Michael Norman of the U.S. are head and shoulders above everybody else in the world right now. Gardner is the reigning Olympic champion from Tokyo, but he was hurt in 2022 and did not run at Eugene. And then I believe it was in the semifinals in Budapest last year. He had to pull up with about 120 meters left, I think it was. So he has not been able to really compete in either of the last two world championships. And then Michael Norman won the world title in Eugene in 2022, and he did not race at all in Budapest last year. So I feel like if these two guys are healthy come Paris, it is going to be a race between them for gold. And that is by no means a sign of disrespect to reigning world champion Antonio Watson from Jamaica. He ran really well in Budapest last year to take his first world title at a very young age. But like I said, I feel like there is just a gap between Norman and Gardner when they're fully healthy and the rest of the world. One athlete in this event that I will be very interested to watch this season as a Florida Gator is Champion Allison. For those of you that don't remember, Champion Allison kind of lit the world on fire in 2022. He got silver at the NCAA Outdoor Championships, and then he got silver again at the USA Outdoor Championships, but he did that in 43:70, which made him the 10th fastest athlete ever. He finished behind Michael Norman, obviously. He went on to finish just off the podium in 4th at the World Championships in 2022, but then he missed basically the entirety of 2023 with an injury, but he is back this year. He's ran some meets indoors with not super great results. He just scratched from USA indoors last week, but I think he could, if he's healthy, he could be primed to be a big, big factor in the global 400-meter scene this year. Moving on to the hurdles, we'll start with the 110. Obviously, the guy to look for here is Grant Holloway. He's currently having the greatest 60-meter hurdle season of all time, and the other two greatest 60-meter hurdle seasons of all time are also his. He broke the world record in the 60-meter hurdles at 7:27, his own world record, obviously, at 7:27 last week at USA Indoors, and he's looking to better that much more in Glasgow this weekend. And I think that will translate into the outdoor season. And obviously, he's another guy, along with Noah Lyles, where he was heavily favored going into Tokyo and was not able to come away with the Olympic gold. So he is going to be booking it for his first Olympic title. He is obviously going to have some stiff competition, though, from the reigning Olympic champion, Hansel Parchment, as well as his countryman, fellow Jamaican Rashid Broadbell. Parchment got silver last year in Budapest and ended up running at the Prefontaine Classic, beating Grant Holloway and running what ended up being the world leading time. And then Rashid Broadbell had the world lead going into Budapest last year. And I believe it was in the heat, he clipped a hurdle. So he obviously didn't move on. And that was kind of unfortunate because it would have been really interesting to see him and Parchment and Holloway all in the same race in the final. But they're obviously going to be very strong contenders this year. And then, as always, you have a very strong American contingent behind Grant Holloway in Cordell Tinch, Trey Cunningham, Daniel Roberts. Unfortunately, Devin Allen, I'm pretty sure he tore his ACL in his other job with the Philadelphia Eagles in the fall. So he is not going to be racing this year, which is incredibly unfortunate. Because even last year, when he was splitting times between football and track, he was still able to run. I think he ran 13:04 last year, which was one of the top 7 or 8 fastest times in the world. But it still leaves us with a very strong American field. And I would be incredibly surprised if there is anyone not from the United States or Jamaica that makes it onto the podium in Paris. In the 400-meter hurdles, could we be looking at a repeat of the greatest 400-meter hurdles race in history? Obviously, I'm talking about the 2021 Olympic final between Karsten Warholm, Alison dos Santos, and Rai Benjamin. Warholm has to be coming in as the favorite. Obviously, Rai Benjamin clipped him for the world lead at the Prefontaine Classic last year, but Warholm is coming in as the reigning world champion, reigning Olympic champion. He's still the greatest of all time, and Benjamin still has yet to show an ability to beat him in the championship races where it really matters. Alison dos Santos was coming back from injury last year, so he had a little bit of a down year. I believe he ended up only about 6th or 7th time-wise in the world last year. But he, with a full season to get healthy, those three should be primed to do scary, scary things on the track this year. And then also, you got to throw in the mix the silver medalist from last year, Kyron McMaster, as well as the man who shattered the world junior record in this event last year, Roshan Clark from Jamaica. Those two guys could make it interesting, but if they're all healthy, I think it will be incredibly challenging for anyone other than dos Santos, Warholm, and Benjamin to find their way onto the podium in Paris. In the 800 this year, it's a pretty similar situation to kind of what we have in the 100, where there are just a ton of guys that are all so good, but so clumped together that really we're just going to see who's able to break out of the pack when the time really comes. Obviously, you have the reigning world champion, Marco Arop from Canada, who had a really big run at Worlds last year to win the gold medal. And then he ended up getting edged out by Emmanuel Wanyoni at the Prefontaine Classic, but they both obliterated their PRs in that race. The aforementioned Emmanuel Wanyoni is definitely going to be one to watch. And then you've got a contingent of a couple other really strong runners, Bryce Hoppel of the U.S., Wycliffe Kinyamal of Kenya, and then the two Algerians, Jamel Sajadi and Slimane Mula, who just consistently find ways to perform. That is just scratching the surface of what is, like I said, an incredibly deep 800-meter field this year. And it is just going to be, it was such a fun event to watch last year because it felt like a different guy was winning every race. And then when it came down to it, Arop came out on top when all chips were on the table. And I think it's going to be another year of very unpredictable but very entertaining running in this event. Moving up to the 1500, it was definitely maybe the best event last year. I see no reason that it can't be. And like I said, discus was the best event. I just meant it's my favorite event. The 1500, like quality of the field wise, it is probably the better event right now, given the sheer number of historic performances. Everybody from last year is coming back, except one significant omission, which is Mohamed Katir of Spain. He was suspended for 2 years last week, I believe it was, for whereabouts failures. So that is very unfortunate to see, obviously, because A, he's a phenomenal competitor, and B, obviously, doping sucks. But all the other big guys are still there. Obviously, the pack is led by Jakob Ingebrigtsen, despite the fact that he's gotten silver at the last 2 world championships. He is still the big dog, the head honcho, the 4th fastest man all time in the event. And I think, I hope that he has learned his lesson now, and not like he'll stop talking and stuff, because the amount that he talks, like after Josh Kerr obliterated the indoor 2-mile world record last week, saying I could have done that blindfolded, like that is amazing. I don't want him to stop talking when I'm saying he should learn his lesson, but the way that he runs the championship races, he just needs to I know it's hard without a pacer, and this is coming from someone who's never ran a distance race before, so I might just be talking out of my gourd here, but I feel like he should just be cognizant of the fact that he can run like a second faster than anybody else on the planet, and he just needs to do that, which obviously is way oversimplifying things, but I just think it'd be cool to see. Obviously, he won the 1500 in Tokyo, so he's coming back as the reigning Olympic champion, but there are going to be a lot of eyes on him when it comes to the final in this one, just because of what's happened at the last 2 world championships. Speaking of the last 2 world championships, by no means am I trying to discredit the reigning world champions Jake Whiteman and Josh Kerr, both of Scotland representing Great Britain. They're both great. Like I said, Kerr just shattered the indoor 2-mile record, so he's obviously in great form. He will be running at the World Indoors when originally he was not planning on it, so we'll see what he does there. And then Jake Whiteman is back after missing all last year due to injury. It's been a little bit of a slower start to the season for him, but you can kind of understand with him just getting his legs back underneath him. He should be back in full force by the time that the Olympics come around. And then there are just a ton of guys after the 3 most recent global champions. There are a ton of guys after them that are absolutely going to be in the mix to run incredibly fast times this year. Headlined, I'd say that group is by Yard Nagus of the U.S., but then you've also got Abel Kipsang. Cameron Myers is a 17-year-old Australian who just beat Jake Whiteman in a 1500 a couple days ago, and he's currently the outdoor world leader in the event. So he's 17. So it would be asking a lot of him to get involved in the podium chase at the Olympics, but I wouldn't entirely put it past him right now. And you also got 2 other really strong Americans in Hobbs Kessler and Cole Hawker, who've been running really well indoors. And Hawker obviously had a really strong finish to last year outdoors. But once again, that is just scratching the surface. I'm pretty sure we had like 13 guys run under 330 last year, and then like 10 more under 331. So it is just the quality of like every single field at basically every single Diamond League race this year is going to be ridiculous. And you should be tuning in to every single kind of middle distance, either like 1500 up to 3K at the Diamond League meets this year. Tune in to basically every single one because they are going to be awesome. The 5,000 is just as impressive as the 1,500 was. Looking at last year, we saw 6 men join the group of the 11 fastest men ever over the event. And that does not include Joshua Cheptegei, who is already the world record holder, who ran, I think, like the 7th or 8th fastest time ever last year. And then Berhu Aragawi also, he had 2 races that will put him into that category. So it was just a wild year in this event last year. Tons of guys running in the low 1240s. And there is no reason to believe that anything other than that would happen this year. You've got Joshua Cheptegei, like I said, the world record holder, and then Berhu Aragawi, who was the world leader last year. Yomif Kajelcha, Jacob Kiplimo, Hagos Gebrewat. Grant Fisher, coming back from injury, has been running really well indoors. And then you have the ultimate wild card in this race, and that is Jakob Ingebrigtsen, who didn't run a 5,000 all year last year. He spent his summer racking up world records across the middle distance races. And then he runs like 2 5,000-meter races all year and becomes the world champion. That is just kind of a testament. And it's even crazier when I talk about the 10,000 in a second. But that is just a testament to how championship distance running is like an entirely different sport than like Diamond League distance running. Because Jakob's only time last year was, I think it was 13:11, which was like well outside of the top 50 in the world. And yet he was the world champion. So there are going to be wild times throughout the year here and there. But really, when it comes to what actually will go down in Paris, it's anyone's guess. But my guess would probably be Jakob Ingebrigtsen, because that is just what he's done the last 2 years now. Moving up to the 10,000, like I said, Joshua Cheptegei is ridiculous. He ran one 10,000 meter race last year. He was the 99th fastest athlete in the world in the event last year. He was also the world champion. So that is, like I said, that is just an example of how much variance there is between regular season distance running and championship distance running. Obviously, Joshua Cheptegei, no matter what kind of race it is, could win because he is also the world record holder at the 10,000. But it just shows that when it comes to those kind of high pressure tactical races that you see in the Olympics and the World Championship finals, it's really an entirely different sport, like I said. So other important players in this event this year are going to be the aforementioned Barahu Aragawi. He was the world leader last year over 10,000. Selman Barega is also poised to be a key factor. Grant Fisher, once again. And then a couple other Americans in Woody Kincaid and Joe Klecker. They both, time-wise, I think they were both top 7 in the world last year. Last year was a bit of a, compared to how insane the 1,500 and the 5K were last year, it was somewhat of a weaker year for the 10K. So those guys ended up 5th and 7th. I don't know necessarily how well they fare in like championship races, but it is worth noting them there just given how highly ranked they were last year. But still, I feel like regardless of whatever any of those guys I just mentioned do, it feels like an inevitability at this point that Joshua Cheptegei is somehow going to find a way to cross the line first at the Global Championships. Finally, in the 3,000-meter steeplechase, I mean, there's really no reason to expect this to be anything different than what we've seen the last 3 years, and that is just a dogfight between Soufiane El Bakkali and Lemaitre Girma. Soufiane El Bakkali is he's probably the greatest championship runner that I've seen in my last 3 years. He's one of only, I believe, 6 athletes across the men's and women's fields to win Tokyo, the Olympics, and then both of the world championships in Eugene and Budapest. And he's done that over the world record holder in the event, Lemaitre Girma. Lemaitre Girma has run 4 seconds faster than El Bakkali ever has in this event. His times in flat races without the hurdles are so much better than El Bakkali's, but it is just another testament to how wildly different championship races with a ton of pressure and no pacers are, because he simply has not been able to beat El Bakkali in those kinds of races. And I feel like eventually that dam is going to break and Girma is going to figure something out, but it's kind of hard to believe that's going to happen when, if there's going to be a year to do it, it was last year. Coming off of the world record, you're coming off of, I'm pretty sure he has the world record in the indoor 3,000. He set that last year as well. And he ran under 3:30 in the 1,500. He ran really well in a couple other flat races, and he still couldn't get it done when it mattered most. So there's really no reason right now, before the season, to say anything other than Soufiane El Bakkali will repeat as Olympic champion, and he will be one of very few athletes, I believe, that will be going for 5 straight golds at the 2025 World Championships. Behind those two, there is a very strong group, but it's going to be a dogfight for third, because unless if one of these guys gets injured, I really don't think it's going to be anyone other than those two at the top of the podium. But you've got Abraham Kibawat, who won the bronze medal last year, and then Getnet Wale and Simon Koech as well. They all were really close together time-wise throughout all last year. And then, like I said, Kibawat was able to find his way onto the podium. So I expect it to be those three guys probably throughout most of the season, kind of battling behind the top two once again. Wrapping this up with jumps. Like I said in my Worlds videos last year, the jumps are the area of events where I know the least and really I follow it the least aside from Mondo Duplantis, because who doesn't follow every single move that Mondo makes? So this is probably going to be a shorter section. We'll start with the long jump, where it is just so many guys that are all really, really good. And it's really hard to see guys kind of pull away from the pack. Obviously, long jump is an event that has been a topic of lots of discussion in the last week or so, because World Athletics announced a plan to experiment with a takeoff zone instead of a set line on the board, which is the way it has been forever. I don't think that would be a good change. It would make things more exciting, but it would completely, the best argument I've seen against it is the fact that it would completely change the way that high school and like lower level collegiate athletes train, because most places that aren't professional or high level NCAA meets are not going to have the equipment to like accurately judge exactly where an athlete's taking off if it's not just from the board. So that would completely change up how they're training, where up until you're like say 20 or something, you have this set line, and then all of a sudden the set line goes away and you're just jumping as far as you can. So I don't think that would be a good rule change. I'm pretty sure they're not going to start testing it until 2026, I think, which is coincidentally enough the first year in several where you won't have a global championships. So I don't think we have to worry about that this year, but it was something worth pointing out. I feel like the top two guys this year are going to be Miltiades Tentoglu, the reigning world champion, and then Wayne Pinnock, who got the silver medal last year in Budapest. And they were knotted up at, I want to say it was 850 going into the final round. Then Tentoglu, I think, beat it by 2 or 4 centimeters to take the world title. They've both had a really good start to their indoor season, and there's no reason to assume that. I mean, Tentoglu has just been a model of consistency for the last couple years now, and Pinnock really came on strong last year. So I would expect them to both have really strong seasons. They'll both probably end up on the podium in Paris. As for behind them, there are just a ton of guys. Quite frankly, way too many to list. But there's going to be a bunch of guys, I think, in that kind of season's best wise, kind of like 830 to 845 range, maybe 825 to 845. But I think when it comes down to brass tacks and what really matters, it's going to be once again Tentoglu and Pinnock on top. In the high jump, I feel like there's kind of a top three, and that's going to be the podium from last year. So Javon Harrison of the U.S., Gianmarco Tamberi, reigning world champion from Italy, and then Mutaz Barshim, who is maybe right behind Javier Sotomayor, the greatest high jumper ever. Obviously, Tamberi and Barshim are reigning Olympic champions because they had the shared medal moment in Tokyo that is one of my favorite things in the history of the world. All three of them, I think, when it comes to performing at championship meets, have kind of elevated themselves from the rest of the world. There are three guys that I think will kind of be right behind the top three, and they could make things interesting. And that's Sunghyuk Woo of South Korea, Hamish Kerr of New Zealand, and Shelby McEwen of the U.S. All three of those guys have had really solid starts to their indoor season. They were all pretty solid outdoor last year. And so I do think they are kind of like a little bit of a tier below the top three guys, like I said, but they could definitely be in the mix. One final note for high jump is that they do have, I think, one of the more interesting situations in world athletics right now, where Daniil Lysenko, who is a Russian athlete, he posted the world lead last year. He jumped 238, which was above anything that Tamberi, Barshim, or Harrison could do all year. And currently, he has the world lead as well at 236, which is 3 centimeters ahead of everyone else in the world. But Russia has been banned by World Athletics and any sort of international competitions. So Lysenko has been doing this in competitions strictly in Russia and Belarus over the last 2 years. And it is just a really interesting situation. Obviously, I'm not going to get super deep into the political situation on this channel, but it's really interesting that the guy who has been technically the best in the world the last year and then the start of this year is going to be completely ineligible of competing at the global championships. Triple jump is an event that I'm looking at kind of similar to high jump, where I think there's already a three-man kind of distinct podium going into the season. And that would start with Jaden Hibbert, the 19-year-old Jamaican phenom who absolutely lit the world on fire last year and looked poised to take his first global title in Budapest last year. But unfortunately, on his first jump of the finals, he injured himself, and so he didn't record a mark in the finals. But he jumped 1787, which was a massive World U20 record last year, and there's no reason he isn't going to further that mark this year. Pedro Pichardo would be the next guy on that list. He's the reigning Olympic champion. He won the world title in 2022 in Eugene, and he had a really good start to last year. He had a jump of 1795 in May with a barely illegal wind marking of plus 2.1. So he was in really great shape last year, and he's performing really well, but he got hurt. He did not appear in Budapest. But if he's healthy, he's definitely going to be in the mix for that podium. Probably going to be him and Hibbert 1-2, I would assume. But then obviously you can't count out Hughes Fabrice Zango, the reigning world champion last year, who kind of stepped up in the absence of Hibbert. And not to say Zango jumped really well in Budapest, so it's not necessarily a given that Hibbert would have beaten him, but he's also jumped really well in the past. He's been over 18 meters in his career. So those three, I feel, are kind of separated from the rest of the field. One guy to look for in that field, so to speak, would be Andy Diaz Hernandez. But other than that, I would be somewhat shocked at the outset of the season right now if anyone other than those three guys ended up on the podium. If you know basically anything about track and field, you know who the big dog is in men's pole vault, and that would be one Mondo Duplantis, the world record holder, the greatest pole vaulter of all time, probably the best athlete in the world, maybe aside from Ryan Krauser. He is the definition of inevitable, but behind him, there's a really strong squad of 5 guys. Leading that pack, I would say right now, is silver medalist from Budapest last year, EJ Obiena from the Philippines. And then you've got the joint bronze medalists last year in Curtis Marshall and Chris Nielsen. And then you also have another pair of Americans in Casey Lightfoot and Sam Kendricks. Those 5 guys are all super consistent and super good. And like I said, 3 of them were on the podium with Mondo last year. So it really feels like it's going to be some combination of those 5 guys coming in the last 2 spots in Paris. But it should be, obviously Mondo is going to win like basically every meet he's in. But watching those guys battle it out theoretically on like almost weekly basis once the Diamond League meetings start is going to be very exciting. All right, well, that does it for my kind of preview of the 2024 outdoor season. This season is going to be so incredible on so many levels, and I'm so excited. And the fact that it's an Olympic year just brings it all up another level. These guys are going to be going absolutely out of their minds in every single meet all year. You will not want to miss a single Diamond League meeting. I guarantee you that. And then eventually, when we finally get to Paris in the end of July and early August, there is not going to be a single event that you will not want to be sat in front of your TV for, because it is going to be absolutely phenomenal. And this is just half of it. We haven't even gotten to the women's side yet. Like I said earlier, next week is going to be the World Indoor Championships. So I'm probably going to be looking at doing a World Indoors recap and then my women's preview coming out after that one. So probably in like 2.5 weeks maybe, which should be before a lot of the bigger meets start in mid-March. So we should be okay there. There's probably going to be a Bruins video coming out early next week in between those. But track-wise, it's going to be this one, and then World Indoors recap, and then women's preview. But for now, that is all for me. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. Please follow the Instagram at Paul Sports Takes, and I will see you guys next time.